We do these every other month to update everyone on what's going on at the association and kind of bring in some speakers to update on what is going on in either the real estate industry or the Cape Cod community or both. Want to thank the Cooperative Bank Cape Cod for being our presenting sponsor of Zoomed In on Real Estate ever since we launched this in 2020, in April of 2020. They've stepped up right there and was a great sponsor. Obviously today is September 11th, so we wanted to take a moment first to have a quick moment of silence, if you would, to remember those victims today and everyone that gave their lives to protect our country and to respond to the terrorist attacks from September 11th, 2001. So if we can just have that real quick, that'd be great. All right. On September 11th, 2001, the National Association of Realtors actually moved forward and created a Realtors Relief Foundation. It was actually born out of that tragedy to help respond. And the chair for the New England region, one of the co-chairs for the New England region, Lisa Printo, one of our members, is here to just talk about it, since it is imperative to talk kind of on this day around the Realtors Relief Foundation, since it was born on that day, and how to respond. So Lisa, you want to talk a little bit about the Realtors Relief Foundation and what it does?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much, Ryan, and Danielle, and everybody for giving me the opportunity, and especially for commemorating 9/11. You know, it's one of those things that unless you were there, unless you had a direct connection, it's one of those horrible tragedies that ends up, you know, kind of going from our minds. But as realtors, we always will remember 9/11. As Ryan said, within hours of 9/11 happening, the executive leadership team at NAR developed this foundation. They knew they wanted to do something, not for realtors, but for the community around 9/11. And they poured, I think, $8.4 million into urgent housing related needs at that time. And it was the president, Richard Mendenhall. Many of us know Elizabeth Mendenhall, his daughter, who was a much more recent NAR president, but Richard Mendenhall and three others, actually: Martin Edwards Jr. From Tennessee, who was the president-elect; Kathy Watley from Florida, who was the first vice president; and Pat Kaplan, who was the treasurer at that time in 2001. They really, you know, got together and knew that this was an important way that realtors could contribute to the strength of our communities, particularly in housing issues. And that has gone on. We're in our 22nd year now. We have actually granted over $40 million in these years since then. This year alone, good news or bad news, has been our most philanthropic yet. Already have donated over $7 million to places like Hawaii, as we know, but also Vermont, which was granted immediately a little over $500,000 to help that kind of freakish flood that completely devastated and took down our the Vermont Association of Realtors building, oddly enough. So a couple of things I just want to make sure people really do understand. And I'm going to put a couple of links in the chat so that you can, you know, there's a great text number you can have. There's a great article that Mike McGrew was featured in a Chicago magazine that gives some background as well. But all of the money, 100% of the donations to the Realtor Relief Foundation go to relief. This is a 501c3, so it truly is a nonprofit organization. So it's tax deductible. All of your donations are, we can say donations versus investments, are tax deductible. And a realtor typically brings forward one of these, you know, opportunities, tragedies, one of these needs in the community, but it's not money that goes to realtors. It's money that goes to the community. And that's been Florida when the buildings collapsed. I mean, it's all over the country when something happens to a community that we're involved with. In fact, here on beautiful Cape Cod, remember a couple of years ago when we had that freakish tornado that took the roof off of a motel? Immediately, we got, in fact, I remember Marissa Sears saying that the money that came from the Realtor Relief Foundation came almost immediately, and they did get some Red Cross aid eventually, but it was nothing like the kind of timely response that we got from Realtor Relief Foundation. So for me, this is such an amazing way for us to continue to show up in all times, challenging and fabulous, to show up in our communities, that we care about housing needs, we contribute in that way, and that 100% of the donations do go to the communities that are in need. So again, this is a year that we are looking at, from forest fires in California to the floods in Vermont. I want to say it never ends, but it really does never end. And it's a really great way for us to continue to show up and promote the fact that we do care about everybody in the community. So I guess with
And
Ryan,
also
go ahead.
the wildfires in Maui as well.
Yep.
There's
Yeah, 1.5 million so far has been I'm putting a couple things in the chat. Actually, I'm hoping to put
and just a couple things, we got about, I think we doled out about $12,000 in Harwich several years ago, as you mentioned, for housing related needs from the tornadoes there. And once a natural a disaster area is declared, then the Realtor Association can get involved and start requesting money, and so it's been great. It was easy, but like you said, all the money goes directly to the relief victims, because NAR, out of their own organization's money, staffs the organization, manages it, distributes the money, that kind of thing. So all the money raised goes directly to people. So it's one of those things that on 9/11 every year we remember how realtors came together and raised and spent and distributed a ton of money really quickly to help the victims on 9/11. And so it's always nice to highlight that. So thank you,
Absolutely. And
Lisa, and also on Shannon Buss,
Yeah.
our members that are heavily involved with Realtors Relief Foundation as co-chairs for the New England region. If you have more questions about the Realtors Relief Foundation, feel free to reach out, and I know to either one, and I know Lisa's going to put some more stuff in the chat. So thank you very much, Lisa, for being on.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. And thank you for the support that Cape and Islands offers every year.
All right, and a couple things. Tonight at 6 p.m. we will be restoring our dashboard. Just putting that out there for everyone to know on that. We will have downtime from accessing the MLS from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern time tonight. We want to thank you for your understanding during this time over the last month, and apologize for the disruption in your regular flow of business. This was not the member experience we strive to provide, and as our association management system, what we call IMS, which is the way you pay, sign up for classes, things like that, comes back online, and then also the dashboard as well, with all your single sign-on tools there. And so from 5 to 6 we'll have some downtime, and then by 6 p.m. we expect full restoration. If something happens and it's not happening right, you'll be getting email out from us as well, but Marcia and Danielle and our staff will be working during that time to make sure everything's up and running for you. So we really appreciate your time during that. So please reach out to us with any questions. You can find more information in the Flex MLS dashboard right now, or an email also went out this morning as well. Upcoming virtual CE classes to make you aware of. We've got several coming up. Brokerage Liability and Office Policies 101. They are the core classes for the CCRE, Cape Cod Real Estate Specialist designation for brokers. So if you're looking toward that, and then also the next two after that are the core classes for the Cape Cod Real Estate Specialist designation with understanding agency and disclosures and transactions start to finish. Then we're finishing with pathways to professionalism, and then in December, Title V, which will have a whole section around around the nitrogen sensitive areas. In that, if you haven't, please take a look at our nitrogen sensitive area resource directory on our website, which details all the new requirements around the nitrogen sensitive areas that the Department of Environmental Protection promulgated in July. If you have questions that we have not answered, please let us know. I know I've got a meeting with Department of Environmental Protection next week to ask some more questions, especially among the some of the transaction related disclosures and also new construction requirements to try to get some answers on some of those issues. And so I've got that meeting next week. So feel free to drop me over any questions you have, so I can get those answered as I meet with them and work on that. Both Massachusetts Association of Realtors and us are actively involved, engaging with DEP to get answers that we still don't know. So please take a look at that, and also our disclosure form. You know, we do not require any forms to be used, but if you do want a disclosure form, we have integrated a new Barnstable County wastewater disclosure form that discloses whether the property is in an NSA or not, and then also discloses potential sewer connection upgrades that may have to happen as well for any property. So we think the form is pretty self-explanatory to use for sellers, but take a look. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions on that disclosure form. It should be in all the major platforms. However, if you do use Dotloop and you want to have it, you have to put it in yourself. So please reach out to Marcia Sterling on our staff. She can get that form to you, and you can get it in Dotloop yourself. But all the other zip forms, Remind Docs, all those others that you may use should have the form. If not, if your forms platform does not have it, please reach out, like I said, to Marcia Sterling, and she can get that done. Also, we're having in-person CE courses come up. We have them on September 20th of this month and November 29th to round out the year. So please take a look at these two days and mark them on your calendar if you would like to take in-person CE, as we deliver CE wherever, however you want. So please take a look at that. The other thing we've done, and it'll be live tonight after Pearl comes back up through our single sign-on dashboard, is we've launched our first on-demand education class, which is protecting the protected classes. So when Pearl comes back up, that's already been in there for a couple weeks before Pearl going down, our on-demand online platform. And so we'll have a couple more coming up later this year and into next year as we build out a full portfolio of on-demand education within Pearl. Couple other things we have coming up as well. We have a pricing strategy advisor certification on October 19th and 20th. That will be virtual, and then also a market the listing certificate, which is a new one, on October 31st and November 1st. Those are both designations or certification certificate classes. Those signups will be out very soon, but wanted to mark your calendar for that. On that, so please take your time on those to pay attention to those. Also this week we are doing a joint social with the Amplify POC Cape Cod. It's well, next week. It's Tuesday, September 19th at 6 p.m. at the Caribbean Lounge. They have a Boss Talk Tuesday they do every month, and we're partnering with them on this month to combine it with the Realtor Social. So please show up to that if you're interested as well. Should be a good time. And also next Friday, September 22nd at 9:30 to 11:30 at our office, at 22 Midtech Drive, we have Passport to Leadership. And what will be there is our President-elect Emily Clark will talk about goals for next year and how to get involved in the association for 2024. As we'll have committee signups and things of that nature. And you'll be able to talk to committee chairs to see what each committee does. And so we encourage you to take the time to show up to Passport to Leadership next Friday on September 22nd as well. And then committees for 2024 are out. Finance committee. Finance committees are 2-year terms. And so we'll have 3 seats up for this year for appointment if you're interested in serving on our finance committee. We have a public policy committee, a diversity inclusion, Committee, Vacation Rental Committee, Housing Advocacy Group, Community Engagement Group, MLS Advisory Group, Martha's Vineyard Advisory Group, Nantucket Advisory Group. So you see them all here. Plenty of ways to get involved and give back to the association, give back to the industry, and quite honestly, learn more as being part of these committees as groups as well. So the interest form is due October 20th to sign up and be part of this going forward. And so if you don't know where you want to serve and you just want to get involved, feel free to give me a call and or an email, and I can talk to you more about where your interest engagement may be the best place to be fit. So if you have interest in any of these, please let me know. We can definitely work you in and figure it out. Couple things on industry updates, couple lawsuit updates. We've talked to you a lot about these. These are all around the antitrust lawsuits, the and commission lawsuits you may have heard. The first is NOSLAC versus MLS PIN, etc. When I say etc., it means larger brokerages and franchisers around the country. I believe it was Anywhere Real Estate, Berkshire Hathaway Home Services, Keller Williams, and I might be missing one, and Remax. MLS PIN and NOSLAC have filed for a settlement. We do not expect that settlement to be approved till later this year. If it is, the brokerages and franchisers involved in the lawsuit have not settled. So the settlement from MLS PIN, I'm sure you heard more about it, but changing their rules a little bit, changing the way things are done in MLS PIN's participation rules around that settlement. And then also you have two other lawsuits, Sitzer and Morel versus National Association of Realtors and MLSs in those areas, as well as the large brokerages and franchisers that I mentioned in the NOSLAC lawsuit. Last week, Anywhere Real Estate, which is the company formerly known as Realogy, which owns Coldwell Banker, Sotheby's, Better Homes and Gardens, ERA, that sort of thing. They filed a notice to settle the lawsuit last week. So we'll see more what the settlement looks like in the next couple days as well. The trial in Sitzer is expected to begin in October. NAR says it still plans to defend its case in court, that its rules are pro-competitive and pro-consumer. And so we'll see what a jury trial in Missouri thinks about that. Really what's at stake, I think, is really what's finding is two issues here. The mandatory offer of compensation, and then the offer of compensation being from the listing broker. So I think where you see this is, the issues at stake, really the offer of compensation in a multiple listing service has always been, you have to offer compensation to list in a multiple listing service. That's always been interpreted as being, at least 1 cent you could offer to meet that mandatory offer of compensation. NAR did update their rules last month to allow NAR affiliated MLSs, which are like us, that are association owned, to have 0 as their offer if the local MLS chooses it, from what is currently essentially 1 cent. So our board will have to decide what they want to do with that. We did have both boards in a legal strategy session in early August with our outside legal counsel to look deeper at the lawsuits going on in the industry, where they are, and what we may want to do as an MLS with our rules going forward. The other issue, it is obviously more nuanced, is Northwest MLS has moved to this. They moved from a listing broker offer compensation to a seller offer compensation, a commission, meaning that the seller's offering the buyer agent commission, not the listing broker. That's a more substantive changes to the flow of real estate transaction, and there's a lot more nuance around that. So I just wanted to highlight those are two kind of separate issues. As you see, and you might see MLS's move from the 1 cent to the dollar to the $0, but only Northwest MLS has implemented a seller offer commission rather than a listing broker offer commission in MLS. So that's, like I said, more nuanced, but just wanted to kind of highlight that going forward. So that's what I have today, and I wanted to bring in Rob Brennan. Rob, many of you probably know, he's an attorney and a developer on the Cape, but he's been really involved and engaged in looking at climate and the intersection of climate and net zero housing codes that the state is moving towards, and its effect on housing affordability, and making sure that as we move toward a solutions on climate change, that we're also factoring in housing affordability. And I'll bring Rob in to talk a little bit. He has a presentation kind of run through from a study that was recently conducted by Wentworth and MIT, and I'm sure Rob will go more into the background of that study. But this was a study, kind of Rob's brainchild study, but also around the Massachusetts Association of Realtors also helped fund it, to kind of look at what impact of net zero building code would have on housing costs and housing affordability in Massachusetts. So Rob, with that intro, I guess I will turn it over to you. And you practice at Smoke and Vaughn law firm right now, and you can talk a little bit about yourself and what you do in that vein. But also I wanted to turn it over to you, and then I'll kind of moderate questions. If they have any, they can ask in Q&A, and as we go forward, and we'll try to hold questions to the end, and then me and you will probably have a little bit of conversation about some of the stuff you talk about.
Great. Thank you very much, Ryan, for giving me this opportunity, and allowing me to come here, wearing many different hats. As you point out, I have developed here on the Cape. Folks might be familiar with our project in Dennisport, which was Heritage Sands, and that was kind of my transition from having worked at that point. I think it was 10 plus years as an attorney with clients down here on the Cape, including New Seabury, with Heritage Sands. It started kind of a 20-year sabbatical, I call it, where while remaining a lawyer and dealing with a lot of legal issues, my focus was playing the role of developer. So having developed Heritage Sands, and then in Hyannis, 255 Main Street, and Sea Captain's Row, two rental housing projects in Hyannis, and then most recently, within the past year, coming back into the practice of law, joining Smolak and Vaughn with an office at 255 Main Street, one of the buildings that I developed, giving me the opportunity to work with now many other developers, both nonprofit in the form of Housing Assistance Corporation, and the Planning Office for Urban Affairs, which is kind of the Catholic Archdiocese of Boston's housing developer, affordable housing development arm, but also working with HPCC, an organization that you and the realtors have supported, and also over the past several years, when you find that you're both a developer and an attorney, you tend to get invited to take on some other roles. And with the Mass Home Builders, so the Home Builders and Remodelers Association of Massachusetts, I've been involved with them over the past 5 years, and chaired the Government Affairs Committee going on 3+ years now. So with a perspective, grounded here in the Cape, and working with you and others, that are on this webinar, it has afforded me a unique perspective, and that one that I brought to the state. And now I also, serve on the National Leadership Council for the National Association of Home Builders, and sit on the state and local Government Affairs Committee nationally. So again, I've brought this, this Cape Cod perspective, to those roles. And one thing that, I think is very clear, and obvious to all of us, on Zoom today, is that the Cape sits at a very unique intersection of housing and climate concerns. Our, vulnerability to, climate incidents, storms, that are coming, more frequently and packing a greater punch, and now, taking the form not only of hurricanes and nor'easters, but tornadoes that we've experienced here on the Cape. And also, the exposure of our coastal resources, including our, coastal real estate values, which all towns in the Cape, depend upon for a big chunk of their tax basis. So compounding that, is the housing crisis that we, are all aware of. The pressures that are put on the local market by both second and third, home buyers, as well as the needs of working Cape Codders, and providing, that workforce housing, not just hopefully in the opportunities, for rental, but, bringing back the starter home. And I remember I spoke at a gathering you had a couple of years ago. I asked folks to put up their hand if they had sold a brand new starter home in the past year, in the past 5 years, in the past 10 years. And I'm not sure that there were any hands that went up. So we know that, we're again at this unique crossroads of climate concerns coupled, with housing crisis, and one which, the home builders and remodelers of Massachusetts are acutely aware of as well. And a lot of movement, having taken place within Massachusetts over the past few years on the climate front, and that started with the introduction of the net zero code legislation that was first proposed, pre-COVID, then adopted, post-COVID at the end of the Baker, administration, and that coupled with, the municipal gas bans that, I'm sure folks are aware of, started out as supposed to be a 10, municipality pilot program. And already, before any of those pilot programs really have in many cases launched, the state is now looking at, expanding that. So what we, found, even as, the mass home builders, was developing a policy to be at the table and engaged in climate discussions, because we know, when you start talking about changes in building code, how home builders are going to build new homes, that builders need to be at the table. When you want to talk with someone about building a home, you're going to be best informed if it's a home builder that's part of that conversation. And so it was too with talking about building, net zero homes, which, essentially are homes that are much more energy efficient, with the idea that increased energy efficiency will reduce the need, for dependency on fossil fuels, and bring renewable energy generation, onto home sites. So the conversation, that we, the home builders, felt that we needed to bring to the table was a conversation about the costs of doing that. So it wasn't going to be, the headlines that, the Boston Globe and some other outlets were very ready to write, which, started off at little to no cost, ... And then talking about, changes to the building code and gas bans. And we knew that the reality was not that these movements were going to be at little to no cost, but we also did not want to be, be seen as saying don't move in that direction. Because I think again, here on the Cape, where we see the impacts, we know that movement needs to happen in that direction. That there is something going on, with the climate, and I think the case, has been made clearly enough to justify, taking action that, changes in how we build and how, we operate vehicles and other, greenhouse gas emitters, that those changes are called for. But we wanted to make sure that housing and climate was moved forward in lockstep, and we wanted to make sure that the conversation was involved as to costs. So I'm just going to start sharing my screen and take you through a little presentation on, what it is we've been doing over the past couple years, and how this plays out. So, where this, again, ripped straight from the headlines. cities and towns starting to kick, fossil fuels with a new building code. And that, again, as I mentioned, was supposed to, it was rolled out and became available beginning of January. And, what this new code is effectively oops, I just need to, it established a new specialized opt-in code. So I think, folks are familiar with the base code, which is still in 52 communities, including Barnstable. And that is the Massachusetts code, built based on the international code. Most communities, including, most of the Cape, is operating within what's called the stretch code. That was updated again at the beginning of this year. But the third code that is now, in play is the specialized opt-in code. And, this is for, cities and towns that decide to opt in. It was made available December of last year, really effectively January of this year. And what it does is, well, first let me talk about some changes to the stretch code update, because that happened as well. So, you see these things that we talk about HERS 42, HERS 45. For folks that might not be aware, of exactly what that is, HERS is the home energy rating system. And it basically took the energy efficiency of a home that was built in 2006 based on that code and called that HERS 100. And as you get, closer and closer to a zero energy home, one that is generating as much as it's consuming, you lower the HERS scores. So over time, the HERS scores have been adjusted downward. And what this is going to do is it's going to bring, a significant jump in downward trajectory, for the new homes. So the difference too, just to make it clear, between homes with low HERS ratings and a net zero code, is the net zero code, carries the additional requirement of being ready, have the home be ready for net zero in 2050. And why we say ready for net zero in 2050 is because that's when it's projected that the Commonwealth wants to fully, have a code that takes things fully off of fossil fuels, and time, is going to be needed between now and then to make that to make the grid ready to be able to handle, that much transmission, of electricity. So three pathways, under this new net zero code, to compliance. If your home is all electric, meaning, no gas for cooking, no, gas for, for fireplaces, then you hit her score of 45. And that, again, corresponds with the stretch energy code. If you're going to have any kind of gas or propane, your home is required, to be more energy efficient, hit a score of HERS 42. What does that mean? That means that you have to, increase your efficiencies, your R ratings for insulation, putting in, more efficient, more insulated windows, having, ERV systems, for air circulation, because you're building a much tighter envelope. And also, have solar on your roof, where feasible. So again, if you're not going all electric, if you want to have any kind of gas or propane, having to go to that lower HERS score, reflecting higher energy efficiency, and putting rooftop, solar where feasible. And that's a determination that made by the local building inspector, that basically any south-facing roof elevations would be, required to have solar. Third is to hit passive house design. Passive house, separate design, guidelines, and it's a certification. Folks might be familiar with LEED certifications. So this is along the same lines. Certification is done by a third-party institute that promulgates the passive house standards, and you can build in that direction, as well. So I mentioned the solar PV requirement for homes that have, solar access. And then even if you do have any fossil fuels, there's the pre-wiring for future full electrification. So that means, putting in the wiring in the walls already under the new, net zero code, so that you could take a gas stove and have it become, a fully electric, induction stove. Also, requirement for having solar or electric vehicle charging in the home as well. So prior to 2021, we talk about the home builders and climate policy having a relationship where if we were at the table, it's only because we were on the menu, and that's what this is meant to illustrate. And I think that was not a unique policy from certain trade organizations. Certainly the home builders were not alone in not being fully engaged in climate discussions and climate policy. But it was a realization that we came to, and that we needed to take a much more active role, be at the table and helping to steer these discussions by being proactive, providing information, and providing information and providing solutions. So November 2021, the home builders and remodelers, and as Ryan pointed out, it was with the support of the Mass Association of Realtors, the National Association of Realtors, a number of nonprofit developers, and other industry partners. We funded a study, and the idea of that study was, again, to look at what would the added cost be to move from the base code as it stands now to this proposed Massachusetts net zero code. What were the costs, in again, higher insulation values, air source heat pumps, ERVs for air circulation, higher efficiency windows and doors, and wiring, for full electrification. What are those added costs? What would the impacts of those costs be, on affordability and production? And then finally, what policies, could and should be put on the table to offset those increased costs, avoid adverse impacts to affordability and production, and keep housing and climate, moving forward in lockstep. The study in total, we raised approximately $300,000, to fund it. We put the questions and the challenges, to the team that we turned to, and that was Wentworth Institute of Technology, paired with MIT Center for Real Estate. We picked those two organizations after talking with a number of them because Wentworth has an outstanding construction management program. They are in touch with and served as, really our boots on the ground for this study. We wanted to be able to develop and conduct a study that was going to be, working with and getting numbers from actual subcontractors and general contractors in Massachusetts on, the cost of a base build, the cost of a net zero build, and being able to calculate that delta. They did a phenomenal job, and I'll mention some of the tools they used. But then we wanted to take those numbers, and hand them off to the folks at MIT, who I think we probably all recognize are among the greatest number crunchers on the planet. So we knew that with that data in hand, we were confident they'd be able to calculate what the impacts would be on affordability, and production. So at the same time that was going on, we, a group from Massachusetts, including myself and others from the Cape, also took this approach of measuring increased costs, calculating adverse impacts, and then policies, to offset costs and avoid adverse impacts. We took that approach to the National Association of Home Builders and developed the first ever climate resolution from the National Association of Home Builders. So again, the perspective from here on Cape Cod, informing a study that was being done on the state level, and taking that to the national level, became and still is the official policy of the National Association of Home Builders on questions, of moving to a net zero code. So in favor of doing it, but making sure that the approach calculates costs, looks at potential impacts, and has strategies to offset those. Again, we talked about the funding, that we gathered, from a number of folks, including, here on the Cape Cod 5, Mass Association of Realtors, I already mentioned, and then other developers, including, Housing Assistance Corporation as a nonprofit developer, here on the Cape. We also launched a website, housingandclimate.org, and that was to continue, to have a forum for, articles and research, at this, important intersection of how do we keep both issues moving forward together in lockstep. So through June, Wentworth and MIT were developing, based off of real world quotes, what these numbers would be. And I'll mention this because I think if folks go back to, certainly early parts of 22, when interest rates were still low, and housing market was still booming, as it is now, but just with inventory not being a challenge and lots of new stuff being built, it was tough at first, to get actual quotes from subs and GCs on a hypothetical project. And the folks at Wentworth first came up with all kinds of spreadsheets that could be filled out and cross-reference to to what products would meet what standards. And not surprisingly, we got very few, subs who were willing to invest the time to do that. So what Wentworth developed was an app, something that could be accessed, through your phone. It had, the specs called for, what the equipment, without brand naming it, but what the equipment would be to meet those specs of on a hypothetical 2,300 square foot home, and then a hypothetical multifamily project. And it allowed, the suppliers, the GCs and the subs to just use a sliding scale to set the numbers, and submit. And we got a lot of quotes that came in, and the data set, was one that MIT said, great data set, really consistent numbers, some low and high outliers, but a real, core set of numbers. So we know that statistically we were working with something, that was real and that showed real increased costs. And, that again was important because it wasn't so much a question of climate deniers, but we had cost deniers. We had folks that said all this can be done, at little to no cost, and folks would actually be better off for it. So in June, we released the study, and what did it show? It showed the added cost to a single family home was roughly $23,000. That put a median home out of reach for an additional 200,000 families in Massachusetts. And we had an increased cost of multifamily projects by between 2 and 3%. That had obvious adverse impacts on both what corresponding rents would be, and also significantly getting projects to pencil out. You talk to most folks that aren't familiar with real estate development, aren't familiar with multifamily projects, and certainly folks that write some of these articles would tell you, 2 to 3%, that can just be sucked up and absorbed by the developer. But the truth was that we had large national multifamily developers who happened to be doing business in Massachusetts that looked at that and said, unless there was a way to offset this, the projects just would not pencil out. And they would take those resources and build in states that were not yet going in this direction. So, as I said, we had the costs, we looked at what the impacts would be on affordability and production, and then came up with recommendations. And I think not surprising, probably anyone that's on, this Zoom, zoning reform, was a big one. That if you're going to be holding what's built to a higher standard and requirement, and remember, this is just applying to newly built construction, right? So prior to adopting the net zero code, the homes that were being built under the stretch code were already the most energy efficient, homes that were ever built in the history of, American home building. But the zone, the net zero code was only going to apply to what's new. They've since revised that, so it also would apply retroactively in cities and towns that adopt the net zero code to any additions that are 1,000 square feet or more, or renovations that impact 1,000 square feet or more would require, to bring the whole home into compliance. But if you're going to be focusing and raising the standards on what is built, then allowing projects to be built easier by reforming zoning restrictions was one lead recommendation. The second, which the administration has actually already adopted, was the creation of a housing bank that would make money available for projects that were being built to higher energy standards. Right now, the money is just made affordable to projects serving low income housing. Our recommendation is that's got to be made available to moderate income as well as market rate projects. Maybe we don't need to be supplementing folks that are building luxury homes, but certainly on the multifamily as well as single family side, that support is needed beyond just the lowest income standards. A third recommendation was to set up a one-stop program for access. There are projects that are out there, or programs that are out there, both on the federal level and now on the state level. But accessing those programs, where to find them, filling out the paperwork, eligibility. There's misalignment between programs. So the recommendation was, again, to streamline that, to have uniform eligibility, and to have a one-stop shop where projects in Massachusetts could go to access those financial programs. And adding one as well. Federally, there is an IRS tax credit. It's called 45L, which provides, it was $2,500. I think it's been bumped up to $3,000 now. $2,500 now, $3,000 per unit for homes or multi-unit projects that are built to standards that exceed the base code in a state. With Massachusetts, driving this net zero code, the recommendation was to introduce a state tax credit that could offset those increased costs. Another one that's not on here that I want to mention, and I'd be curious, in the comments to hear from folks that might be familiar with this, but it was the concept of changing underwriting standards to take into account long-term savings on utility bills, thereby allowing folks to borrow more money up front because their monthly expenses on utilities is going to be going down. Standard Fannie and Freddie underwriting and appraisals do not take that into account. However, there are special products out there called green mortgages, and there's a green mortgage appraisal as well, and I understand that there's a green mortgage addendum that can be put as part of purchase and sales, but the idea was to change the underwriting so that consideration of those savings on utilities is a standard practice, and thereby letting folks access more money up front to offset some of that $23,000 in additional cost to construct a home. So again, I'd be interested in hearing from anyone who may be familiar with or has used either a green mortgage or a green addendum to a P&S. And one of the final ones, and there were more, I think there's about a dozen, but one of the ones I like to mention is unwinding of merged lots to create starter home lots. And assuming most folks are familiar with the concept of lot merger, meaning you have two perfectly good lots at some period in time that are owned by the same person. It could have been that they bought two lots on a street. However, when they go to pass those on, if they pass on both lots to the same, let's say the same child, and then the town later changes its mind and increases the land required for zoning. Let's say it goes up to acre zoning, and you have two half-acre lots. If they're held by the same person at the time that the zoning changes, those lots are merged. And now you have one buildable lot. If they had been deeded out prior to the zoning change, let's say they went to, to two children, they won't then own them outright, they would be grandfathered. So, not a practice that really makes sense. It's more of a function to facilitate exclusionary zoning, merging of again, perfectly good lots. And it's why I explain to folks that, that aren't realtors, it's why you'll go through a neighborhood and see, home, and then another home with a big, big side lot. So the idea was, if a town is going to increase the requirements for new construction, then any lots, that had been merged would be unwound, and the resulting newly created lot could be designated, for a starter home, which ties into another program that I'd be happy to come back and talk with you some other time, called 40Y, which was adopted as a statute at the end of the Baker administration, and is now, we're writing regulations, for it, but it would create starter homes on quarter acre lots or smaller. So really an opportunity, to bring back that starter home that we built, post World War II, or, here in Massachusetts, folks might be familiar with Campanelli builders and developers and the homes that they created. So we've taken this study, we've briefed the legislature. We had a session back in July, briefing the legislature at the State House. We've met with Lieutenant Governor, met with Secretary Howe, who's the Secretary for Economic Development, and we've met with Secretary Augustus. In fact, this was just over a week ago that we met with him to present these findings. So I think it's important to have this out there. It's important to have this study and the mantra of, acknowledge the costs, look at the impacts, and have, programs ready to offset those costs and avoid the adverse impacts ready to go, because, here on the Cape and off Cape, more and more cities and towns. I mean, this was back in January. The number was 22 cities and towns. We're looking at banning fossil fuels and adopting the new building code. That number has grown significantly, even since then. So, I think this is an important, topic, and I think it's one, that impacts all of us, in the industries that deal with, the provision of housing. But again, it's a strategy, for taking action, at this intersection where climate is important to us, but also housing is greatly important. We're facing crises with regard to both. And I think it's very easy, and it would be very easy to just let this be all about, the climate discussion. Climate activists are very impassioned, very informed, and, very direct. And I think it's our job, to make sure it's not climate policy being advanced, but at the expense, of housing production. So one of the things, that we're also, I want to mention, because it ties into this, and I think it shows that, home builders, realtors, climate activists can all, work together. And it's because, the Haley administration, wants to move forward and prides itself on fostering innovation. So the notion behind that, was the launch last month of the Massachusetts Housing and Climate Innovation Center, founded right here, on Cape Cod, and founded as a result of, myself and others, from the home builders, working with, members of the Cape Cod Climate Change Collaborative, whose board I also serve on, and understanding, that we really need to make progress on both. And, here on the Cape, we have a strong, history of housing innovation, even if we don't recognize it. Because I've seen homes that are built here. I've seen homes that are built on the Cape. And I know, that things are done differently by the tradespeople, that have worked here when they're preparing roofs, when they're preparing flashing, the materials they choose, how they build and what they build with, and, you know, tinkering, you know, that they've come up with or has been passed on to them, you know, from one old weathered set of hands, you know, to another. So the roots of housing innovation as it pertains to, you know, to net zero and climate resilience, I think, you know, the seeds of that, you know, are here on Cape Cod. So the goal, you know, the Housing and Climate Innovation Center is to meet this challenge, you know, producing more housing that can be net zero, resilient, you know, meaning how it stands up to what Mother Nature throws at it, and affordable. That is a really tough nut to crack, and represents the kind of, you know, multivariable calculus that drove me to be a lawyer and not someone who had to work with numbers day in and day out. But that is the challenge. And, you know, the areas in particular, you know, where we are looking, you know, to foster innovation include housing forms and production, net zero construction, building for climate resilience, workforce training, and, you know, doing this in a way that's going to be equitable by having financial models that are accessible, you know, to all. So the idea is to have a physical space, you know, here on the Cape that would attract innovators. Again, either folks coming out of perhaps university labs, folks coming out of their own garage, or, you know, students that have ideas that, you know, that ought to have some oxygen breathe into them, to attract them here to the Cape, give them a space to work in, give them, you know, opportunities, you know, throughout the Cape as a living laboratory, to, you know, prototype, to scale, and to, you know, and to prove up these models. And again, the thought is that by solving the challenges, you know, using innovation, but solving the challenges that are under our feet, not only do we get a solution, but it's the opportunity for that solution, you know, to turn into an economic development opportunity here, diversify, you know, our economy further, and hopefully have, you know, some of these companies that come to an innovation center here in the Cape that are doing their pilot programs and scaling up here on the Cape, that they'll, you know, take root, you know, tap into the workforce here and become, you know, members of our ecosystem. So, you know, the question has been asked, you know, why Cape Cod? Well, a lot of the pieces, you know, are already in place. You know, we have both university resources in the form of the college, who just got a new $38 million science and engineering building, Mass Maritime, you know, obviously. We've got HPCC. I apologize, I didn't update this to put the Cape and Islands Realtors, but obviously, you know, you're a resource here as well. Folks that are in touch, working with housing and real estate. But, you know, and, you know, you can also see that the Cape Technical School here is here. So a lot of investment, you know, has already been made, and, you know, the resources of the folks that work, you know, at this crossroads of housing and climate are available, you know, as well. So again, you know, the kinds of projects we're looking for, you know, residential development of net zero construction projects, you know, fostering and climate resilience, demonstrating climate resilience, and projects looking at renewable energy. There are, you know, support, you know, here as well. We mentioned, you know, I mentioned already the Cape Cod Community College, the Wilkins Center. We do have, you know, mothballed and surplus municipal, county, and state land and buildings, and we have the, you know, the greater blue economy ecosystem, which includes folks on Woods Hole. So I actually did this presentation for a group of housing of home builders. So I will mention home builders have an event coming up as well for anyone who might be interested. It's called Take Aim for Housing. It's going to be a sporting clays event, supported by Toby Leary, who's a member of ours at Cape Gunworks. We're also having at the event the captain of the pinwheel from National Geographic's Wicked Tuna, Tyler McLaughlin. If there's any fans of Wicked Tuna on here, you can find information on that online. It's going to be September 26th. And this is the kind of work, you know, that these fundraisers, you know, Build PAC, you know, which is our political action committee, it's an opportunity, to shape policymaking, in DC on Capitol Hill. And these are some of the numbers. And I know, again, that the realtors do a fantastic job with this as well. So I think there's a lot of promise that working together, we can tackle, this challenge, this balancing act. When I speak, at the state level, I tell folks that there's nowhere, where this is more profound, that the challenge is at this intersection of housing and climate, than Cape Cod. And I repeat that at the national level. And, the inroads that Massachusetts has made, the study, the policies and the proposals that are being put forth to the administration, so much of that originates here in the Cape. And, I'm proud, to be here practicing law, again, working with many, developers, and helping to, in working arm in arm with, with Ryan and others, helping to lead the charge, from Cape Cod at, local, state, and national levels. So thank you.
Rob, I got a couple questions for you, and also a couple questions have come in as well. Thank you for all that. I guess one thing, I guess, especially as there, you say 22 towns have expressed interest in kind of moving forward on this, moving to the specialized opt-in net zero energy code. As this comes up in towns, what should, our members who are involved and everything else who show up at these meetings ask? Like, what are your associated policy changes you want to make? I mean, is that the question?
Yeah, I think the ultimate question is,
what kind of town money are you willing to put toward helping offset this, right?
Yeah, either town money or other programs, but I think it's just going in with a simple approach that says, look, there are obvious costs, of moving to this, and Ryan, through you, I'm happy to make the MIT study available to everyone. The study is conclusive, proof that there is a cost, associated with making these changes in the code, that those costs, if they're not offset, have adverse impacts on affordability and production. But there are policies and programs to offset that. So I think for any town, that has taken up this question, I think going to this, select board's meetings, or at town meeting, and just asking that question of, what are you going to do to offset the costs of this change so that we're not going to experience, further adverse impacts on affordability and production. We're not going to make the housing situation worse here on Cape Cod. And I think as long as
it's not all about deed restricting housing too. I mean, it's the market rate side as we try to build. I mean, right now it's non-existent, but I mean, there's a lot of effort. You and I are undertaking other efforts to try to actually bring back the starter home, new construction community.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So it's to not put us in a deeper hole, because the code only applies to new construction, right? So adopting this code is only going to have impacts if you're also building housing at the same time. But if you make the code and the costs of code compliance such that it makes getting, new housing off the ground harder and harder, then you're not going to have any impact at all, except having an adverse impact on housing. You're not going to have any kind of a positive impact on the climate because no homes are going to be built to this higher standard.
On the solar installation, as we get there, is there consideration? Because one of the big questions around net zero has always been on energy production, on-site or off-site. Is there ability to invest in off-site solar energy farms to offset that for that solar, or does it have to be on-site solar energy?
So right now in Massachusetts, under the code, it's strictly an on-site. It's on-site, on roof, or going geothermal, or or wind. But I think it's going to mean for 99%, it's going to mean solar. So unlike some states like California that allow you to aggregate for offsite, Massachusetts is currently just limited to an on-site solar requirement, with no option to to aggregate and go offsite.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe there's a question comes in. I think one thing you mentioned around the renovation and going to this 1,000 square foot or greater, things like that, kind of you and I's pushes that we've made progress on around accessory dwelling units and other things like that to kind of create that. It seems like that this is going to make it harder. Did the Wentworth study obviously talked about 2,300 square foot building? Have we looked at additions of just cost about adding an accessory dwelling unit or other things on how much that kind of new energy code would be for those kind of new construction projects?
Yeah, so I think, I think what happens, Ryan, as you get smaller is you take the cost of the, cost of systems is spread out over less square footage, but you still need to have the same systems in terms of ERVs, and heat pumps. So I think, the cost does not scale down, right? There may be some reduction because you're not, obviously using as much, insulation or as much glazing, but I think on a per square foot basis, it actually ends up being higher, per square foot than, the $10 per square foot, that it might add on a 2,300, square foot home.
On the 23,000 for a 2,300 square foot home, was there a general idea of what that construction cost is? So you're adding 23,000 to what that normal construction cost would be, so we can kind of look at overall how much even construction cost. I think most people don't even realize how much construction cost would be on that 2,300 square foot home.
Yeah, we didn't tackle that, only because, as so much of that is impacted, regionally, right? So,
and also on materials and everything else you use to finish the home, the finish.
Right. Correct. But we just looked at, the core requirements of HVAC, insulation, and electric were what we looked at to distill it down to that number, or I should say what Wentworth looked at, because they crafted, how to approach this, what to look at, and how to have, numbers that were most broadly applicable across the state.
Awesome. And so do you find the bigger impact on the single family, because you talked about multifamily being 2 to 3%? When you look at it from the developer side point, what is easier to stomach, the multifamily side or the single family side? Where do you see the bigger impact?
Well, I honestly think the bigger impact is going to be on
both, so that's why I'm asking.
Right. Yeah, I think the bigger impact is going to be on multifamily, because that's gonna kill entire projects, so projects won't be penciling out on multifamily. On single family, it's going to have the impact of constricting, who your buyers are, who can afford, that. And I think it's going to drive, more buyers out of a new construction, if those opportunities existed, and into, existing homes. I think you're going to see a gap between, existing construction and new construction opened up there.
Yeah, and I know across the Cape, one of the things that's been reckoning with, right, and what town communities themselves, whether for siting, within neighborhood covenances or historic districts, things like that, trying to figure out siting of solar installations as well. That's
right.
been a big challenge moving forward on this stuff.
Yeah, they did definitely. The state, I think, did not take into consideration Old Kings Highway. So yeah, so that it will be.
But then also you've got neighborhood covenances and all that, right? Like, I mean,
yep.
Some people are trying to put solar like in their yards, not just on roofs, that kind of stuff, right? If you don't have enough coverage, because it's about where you can get kind of sun coverage. And from putting solar on our office building, it was a whole education for me around, where you place it, how you place it, and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And also, big challenge that I didn't mention is, while our workforce is shrinking, and it continues to shrink, within the home building, trades, you also, need to start educating both existing folks and, folks coming into the trades on building, to net zero, on building to these higher energy standards. And it is mandating, a different approach to how we think about building and how we're actually building to hit these higher standards. And I'm not saying that that's not a good thing, But, education, along with workforce recruitment has to be a big part of this. Or, if we don't bring more folks into the trades and we're not bringing them in with this education, then, just the labor availability alone is going to continue driving these and other prices up. So we need to, have more people in the trades that are educated about, methods and means and approaches, to higher energy efficiency.
But it's also consumers too, because we talk about like the idea that some people don't like the look of. I've heard a lot of feedback that buyers don't like the look of solar that's on existing building, homes as they try to sell it on the resale side. I've heard, issues of people being scared away on electrification of houses from the 70s and 80s on the Cape, where we built a lot of electric houses on the idea of the nuclear power, and those power bills end up being higher. And so I think there's a lot of consumer angst around some of the features of the house that you're going to have to get over and figure out.
100%. And I think that's also, that consumer angst is also something that I think drives, the need for innovation, right? And like even on the air source heat pumps, folks look at that and say, I don't want one of those units, hanging on my wall. Well, now you can have air source heat pumps, with air handlers and, and micro ducting. So, you're seeing traditional vents, in the floors and returns, but all that's driven by an air source heat pump. And I think you're going to see huge strides, with regard to solar. One of the latest innovations, out there is, just film that you can put over your windows, and that film is completely transparent, but it turns, all of that, that sunlight into photovoltaic energy. So I think, I think coming up with ways that are more palatable and responsive to the market is going to be one of the roles for an innovation center.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned around the savings as well on the the energy bills, and obviously Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac aren't really factoring into that. We've talked a lot about that, but getting into that, into an appraisal of how that's factored in, and then also you've got to look at comps, right? And so we instituted about a year and a half ago now, probably maybe more, greenfields in the MLS, so that we can start collecting that data, so that if you have some of these green features, we can start looking at it, because the comps around, do they sell for higher pricing? Is there added value, right? That's one of the things that we have as an industry in the real estate world haven't been able to kind of quantify yet. And we've also launched, for those on the call, like a new detail to look at solar fields through the New England Energy Partnership. If there's any registered solar green features around the house, there's a separate pull-out tab for that to be running against their database for, and things like that. Because over time, as these resell and everything else, as you talked about, getting into the mortgage world, it's going to be around being able to justify the cost, right? And be able to quantify any increased cost or the lower energy bills, all that for affordability.
No, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I saw that there's a question, that came in, and maybe this was answered about it was not answered yet, but options for existing homes that are not suited for solar panels. So I think the options there are, you can have, they have these on-site but off-home arrays. They can be done, as roofs, over parking structures. You can have, if you've got a place, kind of a discrete place on your property that can have a freestanding array. But again, I think here too, this is going to be one of the areas, that innovation is going to have, come up with those, those panels, those cells, those films that can be deployed, wherever sun might be available.
Yeah, and I would think that not only as you move to this, towns also need to be thinking about lot disturbance and other things like that may be happening to allow for the solar, right? Because especially a single lot, or even a subdivision lot, right? Like, you're not necessarily gonna be able to keep the land disturbance down if you've got to maybe clear trees for solar arrays and use solar on the roof to get sunlight and everything else like that. I mean, it seems like there's a lot into this that towns need to think about as they think about this special opt-in code.
Totally agree. Yeah, this is it's a complex issue, and again, particularly at this intersection of, climate policy and how it impacts housing affordability and production. The state has to get it right, and we wanted to make sure that they were going into this with as much information on the table as possible.
All right, thank you. And in the recap, we'll make sure we put out everyone's your contact people if they have further questions on this. I think one question may just come in, so let me take a look at that. We talked all about residential, but what about commercial buildings?
Right. So the commercial code, is kind of next up. There's been a lot of pushback, on that. Particularly, coming out of Boston, where NIOP is pretty active and effective. So there've been a lot of carve outs, on kind of the net zero proposals for commercial, carving out, lab space, carving out, manufacturing. But the truth is, sectors like manufacturing, have as much, if not a greater impact, on fossil fuel consumption and emissions, than residential properties. So I think this is all, going to be moving, in this direction. Our organization, the Mass Association of Home Builders, we are, we're focused on the residential side, but this is, no segment, I think, is going to be, exempt from this. But coming back to the same principles, right? Just look at what the costs, would be, on the commercial side, what the impacts would be, for the commercial side, and what policies, and when the policies are on the table, anything is possible. And I'll just give you a quick example in closing from, this ties into some of the comments about solar. But when you went from 2007 to 2017, here in Massachusetts, 2007, total rooftop solar was 2 megawatts across the state. 2017, just 10 years later, total rooftop solar was 2,000 megawatts, across the state. So how did we have that, 1,000 times, multiplier? Well, it's because so many of the programs were on the table and easily accessible. And you started with a 30% federal tax credit. You then had 10 years of renewable energy credits that were paid directly, to the consumer. You had net zero metering, which we still have. And you had 0 to 1% financing programs for your solar, the solar additions. And you had rebates, dependable rebate programs as well. So if this can be, turned into a program that has those same supports, it becomes a no-brainer. You would, if you had the option, you would build to net zero, even if it wasn't mandated by your town, if those same supports were there, as similar to what we had in place. And again, market entrance and innovation, becomes part of that, because between 2007 and 2017, you also had great strides that were made in the efficiency of solar panels. You had a lot more market entrance, coming into it, and all of that, drove the cost down over time. Again, to the point where by 2017, state determined it did not need, as robust a solar program as it initially had.
I would assume the $23,000, because when we talk about energy efficiency, we tend to always end up talking about solar. But the $23,000 doesn't include solar, right?
Does not include the cost of solar.
There's no way you're putting
was
solar panels on your roof for $23,000. So I just want to point that out.
No, does not include the cost of solar. I should have mentioned that. Thank you, Ryan, for bringing that up. It does not.
Yeah, so we're talking about $23,000 of added cost in other things that aren't even talking about the solar issue.
Yeah. That's your air source heat pump, your insulation, your windows, your ERVs and electrical.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, you should probably preface that when you do that talk too. As
yes.
Well.
I have. Yes.
Talking right there.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you, Rob, for that. And everyone, thank you for being on today and taking the time. I appreciate it. And I know people will probably reach out. They have more questions, and we'll be talking a lot about this and the new updated. We'll have presentations over the course of the fall into the winter too about the new updated code as well. Even not on the net energy side, because that code's being updated and been rolled out for updating. So this is something that's going to be a lot of towns are going to be talking about over the next year. So wanted to bring this to you today to start that conversation. So thank you guys all for being on today.